because God hates pride. That is one of the worst things in God's eyes. He says that over and over again. And if you really are honest with yourself, if you'll look at maybe some of the mistakes that you have made, there's a good chance that those mistakes might be rooted in pride. That could be the reason why men refuse to look at maps before they travel somewhere. Don't want to look on their cell phone to find the right location because they have pride about what they're doing. They think, I got this. And so when you look at maybe mistakes that you made with your finances, with relationships, I wouldn't be surprised to find pride at the very center of it. See, a humble heart, an understanding heart is a heart that has an easy time just receiving from the Lord. When your heart is open to Him, it's easy to receive. Think about what God did. He came to Solomon. He said, ask me, I'll give it to you freely. He gave Solomon wisdom. He'll give you wisdom. He'll give you everything that you need. And by the way, Solomon needed all the wisdom he could get. Because if you read out this chapter, you're going to find a crazy story about a woman who had a baby. Two women had children. They were apparently roommates. And in the middle of the night, one of the women rolled over the baby. You probably read the story here, 1 Kings chapter 3. And so they tried to figure out which mother of the babies, was her child that was living. And it went to lower courts, it got to appellate courts, and finally it made its way to the Supreme Court, which in Bible days was Solomon. And so he's trying to figure out, exactly what is taking place. In verse 24, I want to pick it up in verse 24. He's saying, man, one says this, one says this is her son, but in verse 24, the king said, bring me a sword. And it says they brought a sword before the king, and the king said, divide the child in two and give half to one and half to the other. Such an incredible thought. And verse 26 says, the woman whose son was living spoke to the king because she yearned with compassion. No, keep that child alive. And that is exactly how Solomon knew who the baby belonged to. In verse 27, he said, the king answered, give the first woman the living child and by no means kill him. She's the mother. You know what Solomon had that just blew everyone away because they feared the ruling of the king. They so respected it. He is a second pillar of wisdom that I would identify as the word of wisdom. Solomon had this word in his mouth because he's got a situation on his hands, and yet he knew exactly what to do. The word of wisdom is actually, as we said last week, one of the gifts of the Spirit mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And it has to do with not just seeing something in the future, but knowing what to do about it. There's an anticipation. See, God's wisdom can display in that moment where you know what the consequences will be and what to do in a situation. It's this foresight that King Solomon